I've got a problem. While working on a video, I was recording audio when I said the word Rakdos out loud. But then I stopped recording because, can I do that? Can I assume, when I use a jargon term, that everyone listening knows what it means? Sure, to the Magic veterans listening, saying the word Rakdos activates a neuron specifically reserved for the black-red color combination and hating treasure tokens. But this channel is supposed to be geared towards newer players, at least for the time being. And when you pick up a Magic card for the first time, the terminology and slang of the game isn't just beamed into your mind. It takes time to learn, so I scrapped the line instead. But that's not a great fix either. Language is important to a culture. The words a group uses can imply how it thinks and feels. In Latin, for instance, the word for left is sinistra, and that tells you immediately how the people using this language feel about the left direction. The left side of the body, the left hand, the left path on a road, all of them are bad omens compared to the right. An example of this in Magic is Little Timmy. This term refers to someone who enjoys playing big, splashy, intimidating cards even if they aren't especially efficient. Now that's the working term, but there's also the implication that comes with it. Players who build these kinds of decks are seen with a bit of naivety and innocence, characteristics which the term little implies. Jargon also draws a line between the in-group and the out-group. It's much harder to play Magic with a group of established players when you don't know half of what they're saying. By taking it upon yourself to get on YouTube and spend time and energy researching Magic, you're in the upper percentages of dedication to the craft by default. So, welcome to the in-group. Here's your first lesson. Let's start with the inciting incident. Color terms. They start somewhat normal and get weirder as we go along. When we talk about decks of a single color, we refer to them as monocolor decks. Then you just append the color itself to the end of it. So for instance, a one-color white deck is mono-white. 5 colors, so 5 of these terms. Off to a good start. Simple, easy, sensible. 2 colors should be no issue then, right? Well, about that. The 10 two-color pairs aren't named with any intuitive convention. They have a list of specific names you just need to memorize, which sounds intimidating, but you get the hang of it faster than you'd think. These names come from the 10 guilds that collectively run the city of Ravnica, which is our first example of Magic culture influencing our terminology. These guilds do a great job of embodying the core tenets of the individual color pairs. The Azorius Senate is a stoic and imposing police force, while the Cult of Rakdos are a passionate and dangerous cabal. They do such a good job representing their color combinations, in fact, that the term stuck. So now 2-color decks go by these names. This is also a good time to talk about ally and enemy color pairs. Look at the back of a Magic card. In the center is a pentagon with all 5 of Magic's mana colors. The placement here isn't arbitrary. There's supposed to be a sort of logic that the colors adjacent to each other cooperate, while the colors across from each other conflict. The adjacent agreeable colors are allied pairs, and the opposite conflicting ones are enemies. Okay, 3-color terms. These aren't quite as clean, and this is due in part to a 2-way split. The pentagon will help us visualize the situation. Remember enemy and ally 2-color pairs? Well, we have them for 3-color combinations as well, but 3 points can't all be across from each other on a pentagon. We would need a hexagon for that. So the closest we're gonna get to enemy color combinations in 3 colors is this. 2 allied colors and their shared enemy color. We call this setup the wedge because it looks like a wedge, and there are 5 of these to name: Abzan, Temur, Mardu, Sultai, and Jeskai. These are originally the names of the 5 warring clans of Tarkir. On the other side of things are the 3-color ally combinations. These are just 3 adjacent colors, a setup we call the shards. This term comes from the Shards of Alara block, a set built around the allied 3-color pairings. The individual shards are named Bant, Esper, Grixis, Jund, and Naya. Just like the 2-color combinations, there's not much to grasp onto here other than memorization, but there are a lot of cards that bear the name of the shards and clans to help out with this, like Esper Sentinel and Temur Battlecrier. 4 colors where things get weird. Wizards of the Coast has gone on record as saying 4-color is very hard to design cards for, and so most of the time they just don't. We only have a handful of 4-color legends, and really no dedicated 4-colored factions, so instead the only common terms we have for these combinations are their respective Nephilim. These were a cycle of antagonistic monsters on Ravnica for a brief period, and for the longest time, they were the only 4-color cards in the game. Their names are Glint Eye, Dune Brood, Ink Treader, Witchmaw, and Yortiller. Because these names, and cards, are so removed from coherent design, a lot of players just choose to identify 4-color decks by what colors they do not include. Respectively then, these would be Sans White, Sans Blue, Sans Black, Sans Red, and Sans Green. As interesting as it is to have 4-color be the black sheep of Magic, I'd really love to have some more 4-color designs and have the space explored a bit better, if for nothing else than to ditch these terrible clunky names. 5-color is back to simplicity. It's just WUBRG, which is each letter of the color pie abbreviated. The reason I bring this up at all is because it's important to know the 1-letter abbreviations for the colors. Most are obvious, it's just the first letter of the word, but blue and black share the letter B, so blue gets demoted to U instead. And with that, the color combinations are set, but there are many confusing terms outside of just color. Because of problem-solving card text, some single words are used to represent longer strings of words for the sake of saving space on cards. As cards get wordier and wordier, this becomes more necessary, but still causes a lot of confusion. So, let's talk about some words for the rules of the game. Mill instructs you to take a card from the top of your library and put it into your graveyard. Usually it's paired with a number, and that's how many cards you do this to. Its name comes from Millstone, a card from Antiquities that does exactly this to the top 2 cards of someone's library. What's especially funny is that now the updated text of Millstone reads, target player mills 2 cards, which feels like an Ouroboros of card text. What does milling do? It does what Millstone does, which instructs me to mill. On and on and on it goes. Enters is a newcomer. It's a shortening of the phrase enters the battlefield, and it just means that the following effect happens when this card finishes resolving and arrives on the board. Mana value is... okay, so take a look at the top right of a magic card. Let's say this one costs 3 blue mana and 1 generic mana to cast. That's its mana cost, but in total, you could say it costs 4 mana of varying types. This number, 4, is its mana value. This used to be called converted mana cost, which was more intuitive but also took up more space on the card, so they changed it. Suspecting a creature gives it menace and disallows it from blocking. It's supposed to feel like the creature is on the run from the law, making it a better attacker and a worse blocker. Why are we suspecting a creature? Maybe because he's committed a crime. Committing a crime happens whenever you target an opponent, their spells, permanents, or graveyard cards. It's supposed to evoke an idea of touching someone else's property. If you've ever had your spells countered more than once in a row, you might describe that kind of activity as criminal too. Speaking of criminals, we have outlaws. Outlaws are an umbrella creature type that encompasses any creatures who are assassins, mercenaries, pirates, rogues, or warlocks. Although it's annoying to look up the list in the middle of a game, I actually kind of like this treatment, and wouldn't mind seeing something similar for the very clunky collective of sea creatures in Magic. Knessos and Slyn Voda would really appreciate it. Despite these being mostly newer examples, this complexity isn't exclusive to new mechanics. Protection is as old as Magic, and is notorious for requiring mnemonic devices to remember its effects. Protection from a quality means that the thing with the protection cannot be damaged, targeted, enchanted, equipped, or blocked by anything with the specified quality. Quite the mouthful. Rules terms like these are important, but don't give us much in the way of cultural impact since they're mostly determined by Wizards of the Coast rather than the players. That's the job of slang, and where the fun comes in. If you've heard a Magic player say something goofy or unintuitive, and then proceed to give you a 5-part explanation on the history of the game and why it actually makes total sense, it's probably a slang term. Oftentimes, these fill a similar role to problem-solving card text, in that they truncate longer sentences into single words, but usually have a story behind them, and they're not universal to every group of players. Despite this, I'm going to give you some of the more common ones you'll see around often. Pod started out as a term for the people that you were drafting with, but has gradually come to more broadly refer to the group that you regularly play any game with. It can also be shorthand for birthing pod, but I mean there's not much to explain there, so moving on. A mana dork is a small creature, usually 1 or 2 mana, that generates mana itself by tapping. There's a lot of debate as to whether the origin is that many small creatures are referred to as dorks, or that dork is a bastardization of the word dark in Dark Ritual. That's a flame war for the comments though, not the video. Bouncing refers to any effect that takes a card from the battlefield and returns it to its owner's hand. The origin here is unknown, as its use predates common answers to this question, like waterfront bouncers, by years. It's more than likely just intuitive language from what the action actually being described is. The card originally came down from your hand to the battlefield, so it would have to bounce back up to go back into it again. Scooping is another term for forfeit or concession. It comes from the fact that it's relatively easy to pick up all of your lands from the table and leave quickly if you take a card in each hand and scoop your row of lands underneath and between them. Maybe try this out the next time your buddy insists on taking a 40-minute turn or playing a 15th stacks piece. To burn means to deal non-combat damage to something. Sometimes people will use this more liberally to refer to any non-combat loss of life, but it's primarily damage. If the damage is exactly 1, we call it pinging, and if the damage is exactly 3, you'll hear it referred to as a bolt. That last one harkens back to lightning bolt, and if you want more history on that, Ristic Studies has a fantastic video that you should check out about its impact on the game as a whole. I'll link it down in the description. Ramp refers to any card that will net you additional mana on following turns repeatedly. Mana dorks are a form of this, and if an artifact does it, we call it a mana rock. There's a lot of debate and confusion about this one's origins in the community, but I find it most likely is just a reference to the card Rampant Growth, which puts an additional land into play. Rituals are what you have if a card makes you one-off mana that is non-reusable. Oftentimes they add it straight into your mana pool, and the cards themselves are almost always instants or sorceries. This name comes from Dark Ritual, which is hilarious since Dark Ritual is black and the effect was subsequently immediately color shifted to red and has remained predominantly red ever since. Even still, arguably the best ritual in the game is black. Eat your heart out, Color Pie. An edict is any effect that forces players to sacrifice permanents, usually creatures. The name comes from Diabolic Edict, and got a lot of popularity in the early Commander days as one of the primary ways around indestructible threats. Now we have better options, but edicts got better too, so I don't know, keep playing them, I guess. Back row is a fun one. It refers to artifacts and enchantments collectively, and is part of a strange cultural exchange we have with Yu-Gi-Oh! In that game, the board position is divided up into a front row for creatures and a back row for spells and traps. Enchantments and artifacts would be the equivalent of continuous spells and traps in Yu-Gi-Oh! All of the above are permanents that cannot attack and do not have stat lines, so sometimes Magic players steal that term. In exchange, Yu-Gi-Oh! Players borrowed use of the term tutor from Magic. Speaking of which, a tutor refers to something that lets you search your library for a card and put it either on top of your library, into your hand, onto the battlefield, or somewhere else you have access to it. They help reduce variance in this partially random game. For this reason, you see them often. The name comes from Demonic Tutor, which was released in Alpha. Pitching a card is when a spell you cast has a cost that requires you to exile another card from your hand. Oftentimes this is due to an alternative casting cost, such as on Force of Will, which makes the card cheaper mana-wise by paying with card disadvantage. You are pitching a card to play Force of Will for free. Now for the brothers, Mana Screw and Mana Flood. I bet you can guess what these mean before I even say anything, but it doesn't hurt to be thorough. The former is when the random element of the game decides to give you too few lands, and you end up being unable to cast your spells because of it. The latter means the opposite, when you draw too many lands and aren't drawing enough spells. Both of these unfortunate circumstances are likely to render you unable to play any cards and lead to game losses. If you dislike Mana Screw or Flood, you may blame variance. This is what we call the random factor of Magic. Variance is what separates us from a perfectly predictable game like tic-tac-toe or chess. The fact that libraries are shuffled and cards are always drawn blindly from the top means that every game involves a significant random element, which makes our game partially luck and partially skill. A Wrath, sometimes called a sweeper, is a card that removes a large number of permanents from the board at once. Usually they use the language destroy all, but can also cause you to sacrifice, exile, bounce, or deal damage to your permanents. The term comes from Wrath of God, which was such a hit with early players that this effect became a staple of the game going forward. If you'd like your permanents to survive a Wrath, you may want to flicker or blink them. These two terms are used interchangeably, but some insist they're distinct. They both refer to the action of putting a permanent into exile and then returning it to the battlefield. Usually you do this to re-trigger an Enter's ability or to avoid targeted removal. The distinction argument usually goes like this. Flickering is any effect that immediately returns the permanent to the battlefield as part of the resolution of the flicker, while blinking delays the return of the permanent, usually until end of turn or until your next turn. When someone uses a spell to give their creature a larger stat line, we call that pumping the creature. Oftentimes this is done with an instant, so that in response to blockers being declared, the attacking creature can either handily defeat their blocker, or deal more damage to an unguarded opponent's life total. If you're afraid of a creature being pumped, you may decide to chump it. This sounds similar to Dork, but it's distinct. Chumping, or chump blocking, is when you take a much smaller creature and throw them in front of a massive creature as a blocker. The bit here is that the creature you're putting in the way is just some expendable chump whose purpose is to buy you time. Sorry Llanowar Elves, but you've served your purpose. Let's say your opponent doesn't want you to chump though. They may cast an overrun to get around this. These are pump cards that increase all of your creature's stats while giving them some form of evasion, usually trample. Commonly, these will deal tremendous damage or even end a game outright. The term's intuitive, but it also comes from the card Overrun, which was an early and popular form of this effect. Getting away from creature strategies for a bit, let's talk about engines. Engines are cards, or combinations of cards, that create resources reliably and repeatedly. If, for example, you have one card that puts counters on permanents, and another card that draws you cards when it has counters put on it, then collectively, you have a card advantage engine. Or just play the One Ring, I guess, because Wizards wants us to print resources out of thin air. But engines aren't always easy to set up. Sometimes, we need to settle for looting or rummaging. Both of these are peculiar, as they're terms for card draw but not card advantage. Let me explain. Looting is any effect that has you draw a card and then discard a card. Rummaging is the opposite. You discard a card first and then draw one. Looting is commonly a blue effect, and rummaging is commonly a red one, but not always. Wheeling is another type of card movement. The term comes from Wheel of Fortune, and is a stand-in for any card that has players discard their current hand and draw another lump sum of cards. The cards aren't always discarded into the grave though. Being exiled or shuffled back into the library instead still qualifies you for a wheel. If you'd prefer some actual card advantage, impulse drawing is an option. You impulse draw by having an effect take cards from the top of your library and put them into exile. They come with a clause that allows you to play these cards from exile for a specified amount of time. This isn't technically card draw, the cards never enter your hand, but it's still a great way to get ahead on options. Finally, it's time to talk about you, or rather the personality types you might fall into as a Magic player. We talked about little Timmy earlier, and I think it's time to get back to him. A Timmy is a player who values the exciting and flashy, sometimes at the expense of efficiency. Timmys look at impactful, costly cards like Zakama, Cruel Ultimatum, and Elishnorn, and thinks about how the table is going to react when they see these monsters resolve. The little moniker implies a level of childishness and innocence, as almost every player has a certain level of Timmy in them at the start of their learning experience. This tends to slowly decrease over time a bit, as players learn what's scary isn't always what's efficient. A Johnny is a player who values self-expression and complexity. Oftentimes they're out to show off, or prove something about their deck building skill. Johnnies are known to assemble large, multi-step engines and take long turns. This is usually a side effect of running interesting, niche, and unique cards that need more support to shine. If Timmys are associated with large mana values, Johnny gravitates towards smaller ones with very specific and narrow effects. Spikes ignore how a card feels in favor of how a card plays. They're usually less interested in wowing their opponents and prefer to simply win the game. Spikes are cutthroat, want a mutual competitive understanding, and are happiest when their deck is effective and performing well. Tournament players, for this reason, have reputations for falling into this category. And finally, we have the Vorthos. These are players who eschew a card's effects almost entirely, and are drawn to Magic due to its narrative, setting, and characters. They'll often trade off power for thematic cohesion and deck building. Refusing to run non-zombie creatures in a zombie deck out of fear of breaking the theme, for instance, would be a Vorthos tendency. And that's the end of my list. There are certainly things I missed. This video is probably going to have more knowledge in the comments section than it is in the main show, so feel free to head down there and tell everyone about your favorite bit of lingo. I'm hoping to pick up a few new phrases myself. While you're down there, I don't know, maybe you could like the video and subscribe to the channel and all that. We can game the algorithm together, it'll be fun. But seriously, the growth these past few weeks has been astounding. I wake up every day deeply humbled by the Magic community. You guys are awesome, and from the bottom of my heart, thank you. I'll see you next time. Oh, I forgot to mention, we have a Discord channel now. If you want to get together to talk about the show, or talk Magic with me and my friends, then the invite link is down in the description, and it'll be there in videos going forward. It's got some kinks to work out, but I think it's going to be fun to interact with all you guys. Alright, done for realsies this time. Bye-bye.